without further ado, let's go.
Right.
And this is the most genuine conversation we're gonna have, I feel like. So,
Yeah.
the first question is, what does society often misunderstand about autism in your mind? Like,
Um, I feel like they misunderstand a lot. And this kind of feeds into what we might end up getting into, which is, how has the view or how has society viewed autism over time? Um, I think, well, obviously it's referred to as a disorder, so that's the first thing, right? And you know, part of the issue with referring to it as a disorder rather than say something that can be disabling depending on the environment that you're in, um, is that it implies that there's something inherently wrong, right? Um, and my question always was by whose standard, so do we refer to somebody who is wheelchair bound as having a disorder? No, we refer to them as having a disability. Now, how impactful that disability is depends on how accessible, things are for them, right? Are there wheelchair ramps? Are there elevators? Those sorts of things. Um, and so, you know, I feel like society tends to misunderstand that that autism really is a profile of extremes. And I've mentioned this in numerous, settings before. But we're so used to looking at someone who's on the spectrum as a sum of their weaknesses, right? They're deficient in their social reciprocity. They're deficient in the way that they utilize verbal and nonverbal communication. They have, these interests that are obsessive and fixated. I mean, even our diagnostic language is extremely deficit based. Um, and perhaps, maybe at one point in time that was well-meaning. I'm not sure about that either. I feel like what we get wrong is that, when I refer to a profile of extremes, I mean that there are some things that are harder because you're on the spectrum, but there are also these really significant strengths that are so unique, and they're just, I mean, so cool to see. But we are teaching people on the spectrum to not really look at those, or not leverage those, or use them in their life, build a life around these strengths. We're focused on telling them, trying to teach them how to like make up for these deficits. Um, so, and that is something, it's a hill I will die on. To me, it's, about understanding that it's not a deficit in social reciprocity, for example, it's a difference in how reciprocity shows up. So, how many times have I told parents, when your child comes up to you and starts talking about their area of like interest, they're trying to connect with you, but you're expecting them to connect with you by asking, "Hi, mom, how are you doing?" They're not going to do that. That's not what connects them to you. And so it's like teaching two parties how to understand each other and speak the same language or similar language, so that that parent can see, like, oh, when my kid talks to me about World War II, they're trying to spend time with me and connect with me when they want me to sit down and watch their favorite show over and over again. They're trying to connect with me. To see those bids for what it is rather than like, oh, here he goes again, talking about World War II or whatever. um, so I would say that's the big thing that society gets wrong, is that it collapses the person into just a sum of their weaknesses, and just completely ignores, the strengths that this group has.
that is so on point. Everything you said, I agree with, especially the thing that you said about how autism is like a form of extremes. It's like I get so many comments on my YouTube talking about, you'll find your tribe, like, you just have to adjust like everybody else, you know what I mean? But it's like the challenges are they're kind of the same as neurotypicals, but they're very extreme. I think you like explained it in the way I wanted to, like in a better way. So I
Yeah.
I, I love that. Um, I that's so on point. Seriously.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So I think you answer a lot of the questions. Like you kind of answered like a few like in one answer. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
what um how can these autism traits like how can we like really allow people on the spectrum to really like use these, like what kinds of environments we're gonna have to like build or do to really start helping people on the spectrum to level up their lives and to finally be themselves and not having to constantly like, oh, this is not right, this is not right, so what
Yeah.
do you think in your mind we're gonna have to build, like what is it gonna take for like change per se, um regardless of like the education, which is something that I'm working on myself with my channel, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I think, in general, I want to say like in the last, I mean, even like 5, 6 years, I do see that there is a shift towards more representation and inclusivity and not just work environments, academic environments, even just public spaces. I mean, even at like the Salt Lake Airport, for example, they have a sensory room. 2 years ago, they didn't have that, right? And so imagine the amount of discussion and dialogue that it took to finally get people to pay money to put a sensory room in an airport, right? And that's something that I'm noticing in airports nationally is those things are
Yeah.
just cropping up. And so I think that visibility does a couple of things, right? It helps people recognize like I matter. People like me exist, and so seeing characters on shows or in media, um, people that they admire, music, singers that they really like, that are open about their neurodivergence, that creates a level of visibility that lets that person know like it's not just me. Intellectually, there are others like me, right? But I'm talking emotionally, that feeling of like there is a community out there. um, but that representation also creates, uh, it also lets people realize that there's a need for things to shift. So, for example, if we had one person on the planet, in a wheelchair, I keep going back to that because that's like a more obvious, like tangible example, and autism isn't always visible. Um, but if you had one person on the entire planet out of 8 billion people in a wheelchair, we probably wouldn't gain too much traction at, having things be ADA accessible, right? But once we start seeing, well, it's not just people who are wheelchair bound, it's also other people that would benefit from having these ADA accommodations and services, that's where we start getting traction. Um, and so I think that over even the last 5 years, there's been this gain in representation and visibility, including for people that you wouldn't look at and say you are obviously autistic, which is another, society thing that we get wrong, is we think autism is always visible and not really. I meet many more people that it's not the most obvious thing, right? And that'll just make it harder for them to advocate and get the services they need and the understanding and grace that they might need. Um, so I think that that's a big thing, is that representation and really, having that be visible. It starts discussion. Um, but I also think it takes, it's a movement, right? I mean, I think about other movements, the civil rights movement, the LGBTQ movement. In its own way, this movement is its own civil rights movement. You're not asking for anything special or better than anyone else. You're just asking for equal access, so that you can live your life just like everybody else. Um,
Yeah.
so, with any civil rights movement, we get people that are like, this isn't a big deal, or, this discrimination against autistic people, it's not really a thing, or aren't we all a little autistic? So, shouldn't this be like the case for everyone? And, stuff like that. And so yeah, I think things are shifting, but I think even though autism as a conversation has been around for a while now, it's only fairly recently that things are starting to shift where asking for noise canceling headphones is not this egregious, weird thing anymore. Now people are, the narrative is shifting where people are saying, okay, that makes sense, right? So,
Yeah. Um, Definitely. Yeah, it's that representation that's going to change. I mean, I even said like after the conference we're in that, if we just had like autistic therapists that could just like relate to some of these people that are in the spectrum, because it is really an individual thing, but you can talk to someone on the spectrum that has similar challenges and you can be inspired to change, or or
yeah,
uh or to make small changes in your life that make it easier. You know what I mean? Like I always
yeah,
believe that, like because the the therapists today, of course, they do a good job. Of course, they do, and I'm not against them. It's just that they're still looking at the symptoms instead of the actual like neurological difference.
yeah.
And the practical and the personal experiences always trumps books. Always trumps it. I always said that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
So
Yeah. There's power in lived experience, Stephen. Like, and that's kind of the difference between, we have this whole movement now called neurodivergent affirming care, which is great. There's no knock. I am on that bus. But, now the next kind of like the 2.0 of that is neurodivergent informed care, which is essentially the professional saying, hey, wait a minute, like we can have all this content knowledge, we can be the most empathic, people, and be very well trained in helping with trauma and anxiety and all of this stuff. But what we lack is the lived experience of being autistic. We don't know what we don't know. And so there are more and more providers that are like acknowledging that and just saying like this is a hole in our area of competence. There are autistic therapists out there, but they're few and far between. They're not as readily available, of course, as a neurotypical therapist. And, we can certainly get into like why that is. It's, the educational systems that train you to become a therapist, the licensing exams, the studying that you have to do, the practicums, like all of these things are designed with a neurotypical person in mind. So someone who's neurotypical, is going to experience fewer barriers in getting that degree, getting that license, passing their tests and getting going on that. But there I would say that there are, beyond autistic therapists, there is an organization, I'd have to find it, but it's an organization that is just neurodivergent affirming therapists, many of whom are neurodivergent themselves, and that can mean any number of things. But it really is. I mean, there's something to be said about like this is a neurotype that I share, and we might be different in how it's expressed, but like, you know, I understand the lived experience and the neurological differences and how that might make your anxiety show up or my anxiety show up. right? So, and again, it goes back to that representation, right? If you've ever gone to a therapist for anxiety and that therapist tells you, hey, I've struggled with anxiety too, you feel suddenly this sense of connection of like, okay, so you're not, this isn't just a problem to fix, this is an experience to understand, right? So, and I think for autistic individuals, that could be a huge benefit, right? To sit with somebody or walk with somebody, right? Whatever therapy looks like,
Uh,
and say like, this is you're here to understand my experience, and you've had similar experiences. So
to the viewers out there, like, yeah, this is real. This is real change.
yeah,
Is not only the therapist, but the way we education. I mean, I even think we should have an actual autism an autism degree, like just learn like specific autism, not even psychology, like just learning about autism, everything that has to do, and the whole community just picks like what that curriculum is going to look like, in educational settings, like literally just everything about autism, like not just the
yeah,
psychology, just everything, from the
yeah,
neurological, the psychology, the history, the all the things that entail having autism would, and and with that knowledge for someone that's on the spectrum, that would be like a super weapon to help people on the spectrum. That'll just be that's the need I see, and then we can also, like, I mean, we can give scholarships like to these autistic individuals to go back to school, because to be honest, it's like like it boils down to is like people on the spectrum, they need to have something bigger than themselves to keep going, and when they don't participate in society, it's like it's hard for them, and of course I had like a lot of resources, but not everyone has that, so that's what we're here for, to tell you. So for viewers, like,
yeah.
this is good stuff right here. So
Yeah.
um
Well, you mentioned this like piece about like history, right? And it
yeah,
matters who is telling the story of the history of a group of people, right? I mean,
yeah,
and typically like is the case with the history of America, and it's always the people in the seat of privilege that tell the story, right? And in this discussion, it's neurotypical people. So think about how much of a difference that makes, right? Because the story as told by neurotypical people of what autism is, what is a disorder and what's not, right? Has always been neurotypical people who went and got degrees and, called themselves an expert, which, by the way, there is no like categorical like criteria for an expert. It's not you've had to have been doing this for 20 years, you passed a test. Like you could just call yourself an expert on anything. I could call myself an expert on, underwater welding, and nobody can question me. I just say that I am, and but there's
yeah,
not any particular criteria. So, you know, the people who have told the story of what autism is and what it looks like has always been, people who are neurotypical. And so what that means is that, there's definitely people that have gotten missed, and that we have learned to view people on the spectrum as being deficient. Again, it's that negative, pathology based language. And so I think again that is shifting, right? And I'm very careful in the words that I use. I very rarely use the word deficit. When I do, I back it up with something. Here's why I think this is a deficit. Otherwise, it's a difference, right? Like, I don't say like, Stephen, your communication style is deficient. I say it's different than a neurotypical person. You wouldn't call somebody from a different country who speaks a different language deficient in English. You would say, they speak a different language. And to me, it's kind of a fair metaphor to use. Um, but but yeah, that who's telling the story of a group of people, it matters. And I I see that it is slowly shifting into autistic voices being better represented. That doesn't mean they're equally represented, but they're being better represented, and that's, I believe, where a lot of learning can take place. I can read all the books and evaluate all the people, and I still won't know everything about autism. And my privilege is I then get to sit in my comfy chair and call myself an expert. What I'm lacking is that lived experience ability to say, what is it like for you when you're anxious, Stephen? Or what is it like for you when when you're trying to connect with someone? How do you connect with someone? What is your experience of eye contact? Where did you learn how to make it? Like, there are just so many questions, and the irony is that autistic people get labeled as being like one-sided and lacking reciprocity, and it's all about them and their perspective. But neurotypical people aren't sitting with an autistic person and asking these questions, right? So
Exactly. It's like, I mean, that's what's happening. I mean, and for me, I've been criticized like with being too general with my content, like talking about, oh, you can't say about this group of people right here. But like it's it's like everyone can say they're an expert. I've been told that, oh yeah, you must be an expert. But like it just it boils down to me just listening to a bunch of podcasts, a bunch of videos, like a bunch of different perspectives, and I just believe that of course, like a lot of these autism creators are like making the change and talking about their experience and stuff like that.
yeah,
But it's just like, but the only criticism I have is there. It's just too entertainment. It's like why are you making autism like entertainment?
right,
It's like this is like if you make it entertainment, of course people are not going to take it serious. Of course they're
right,
not. And it's just like this is a serious thing that and I get comments on my videos talking about, hey, this happened to me and I lost my job because I was this way and they just couldn't work with me. And it's just sad. It
yeah,
That's what
yeah,
like if you don't take it serious, other people won't, you know? Like
yeah,
of course you can take a laugh and stuff like that. If we really if America's saying we're about neurodiversity and we won't make change, then actually be about it. Don't just say it, you know? That's
right,
that's that's my thing on it. So
yeah. Yeah, well, it's easy to say it, right?
yeah.
Words are the easy
Yeah.
part. The action is the hard part, because like part of being about it means challenging the systems of privilege that you have benefited from. So that's the thing. I can say I'm neurodivergent affirming and I'm all about autistic people and all the things, but if I then have to like dismantle or be part of the dismantling of a system that has benefited me, a lot of people, that's when they go, oh, well, but I don't know if that we need to do that either. And it's like, well, what if it means then that you're putting your money where your mouth is, right? And you're allowing these individuals to have equal access to things, or have what they need, or have their voices be represented and heard. Um, is that not
Mm,
something that is worth it to you? Um, and that's the other thing too, is I follow a lot of neurodivergent influencers on Instagram, because that's where a lot of learning happens, right? And even,
mm,
YouTube and these different social media platforms, like, you have to go where the autistic people are. And if that means Discord, well, I guess you're on Discord, because that's where they are looking for their community, even if online. And sometimes having that online community is more comfortable than trying to find it locally in their community. And
that's
so
so true.
I think it's great that you're on YouTube, and that there are autistic influencers on social media. For a lot of people that I've talked to, they have said that like that is where I learned that one, I could be on the spectrum, or two, my experience, this thing I thought I did that I thought I was the only one and it was super weird, while other people do it, or other people need it too, or whatever. And so it gives you a access to a community and access to information that is accessible, because sorry, doctors are not always accessible. Like, we talk in a lot of jargon. Like, we don't always do a good job at like explaining things, and in a way that people can understand, in a conversation. And sometimes I wonder if there's something intentional behind that, right? Like, there's so much I know as the expert that Stephen, you would not understand. And it's like,
Right.
so I think it's great. You got to go where the community is and where the people are.
Right. I want to switch gears for a sec and talk about, okay, so we talked about some deep stuff and probably some new stuff that's not been on the internet. Uh so what can what can we do like in our everyday lives like to inch that to make an inch in that change, like going towards the change, like parents are like, oh, I have a son or a daughter, or like someone says, oh, I have a cousin on the spectrum. How can I support them? Like, what can I do to make their life better? Um, like because they want. I think some of the viewers they want to know what they can do today to like be part of the movement, be part of the change. Like yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Um, I think so. I'll preface by saying I think that the best people to answer that question are people are autistic people, right? When
mm,
somebody isn't well, we ask them, "What do you need?" or "How can I support you?" Why don't we do that with someone on the spectrum, right? Um,
yeah,
when, let's say you and I were family, Stephen, and we're going to go to a family reunion. Why would I not ask you, hey, Stephen, like, how are you feeling about going to this family reunion? Oh, yeah, it's going to be a lot of people. That's going to be kind of overstimulating. Like, let's talk about it ahead of time. What do you need so that you can feel more comfortable? Should we kind of come up with, something that, you tell me, or whatever, that means you're overstimulated, you got to leave the situation, or we got to go home, whatever it is. um and so I think there is power in asking questions over assuming. And that's the thing, we ask the experts, right? Which I get it, right? Like, they have a wealth of information, but balance that with asking the person. I think asking, the big question that I always go back to is why. Asking why. If somebody, and I get this question a lot from, you know parents who have kids on the spectrum, that they say they're defiant, they won't do what we ask them to. And I always go back to, like, why are we seeing this defiance? Is it because they really just don't feel like doing what you ask? Or is there something about the task that you're asking them to do that is overwhelming to them? Whether it's a transition, they've allocated all their cognitive resources for the day, or like we talked about, they have no more spoons, and you're asking them to do things that take up spoons. Um, you know, get curious about why you're seeing what you're seeing. But then I also think that starting to think about things in terms of like how we allocate the mental bandwidth or the resources we have on a day to day, and thinking about how that lines up with the expectations that we have of that person. So I might have an expectation that you, Stephen, are going to go to class today, then go to your part-time job, then go hang out with friends, then go play some. And that's my expectation. That doesn't mean it's the right one for you, right? It might be that after, our meeting today, you're exhausted and you're like, I need to take a few hours and just chill out, and then I can go about my day. So, so I think. I think you have to ask about that lived experience. You have to ask, why are we seeing this? Why is this struggle there, and how can I help? Um, that's the number one step. All the other stuff around, like donating money to the cause, and all of that stuff, that stuff can come, right. It really is about getting uncomfortable and challenging those systems that have benefited you, um, and being okay with what that can mean, because what it'll mean is that your autistic loved one is going to have a better life. And sitting down with yourself and asking, is that worth it to you? And for me, it is.
Uh, uh, right. Um, yeah, I do see that. I also want to add to that is yes, I think parents and just people need to listen more to autistic people, but I would say like just teaching people on the spectrum how to communicate is going to bring them a lot of freedom too.
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
to be able to like express your needs, like that's important too. Because if you don't add that piece to it, then yeah, it is going to be, and there is going to have resentment like in your relationships and things like that because you can't communicate. So I think foundationally, a big part of it is yeah, like you gotta like be able to express your needs and like in order to and it goes back again, but you're not gonna know it if you're inside your room. I'm sorry, it's not gonna
Yeah.
happen, and
Yeah.
that's why I tell my audience like you have to go and actually experience life. It's not going to
Yeah.
happen inside your hometown. You know, it's like you got to go out there and try things, like take on some responsibilities, like, try out life and see like what your brain needs. And then you have to learn communication. If you, I promise you, if you get those two down and then people actually listen to autistic people, will make like real change. Like that's like that is the perfect recipe for change, like in everyday life. Autistic people learning communication, like reading and writing and speaking the
Yeah.
best they can, and
Yeah.
people in those relationships with them actually listen and not just listen for what they want to hear or like
Yeah.
or
Yep.
putting them down for their experience, that
Yep.
that's the real change. Like I feel like autistic people they want to change, but they just are going the wrong direction right now. Like not like they need to learn communication, like learn how to really ask for your needs because then that's gonna give you freedom. And then parents, you gotta stop like putting them in a box and like these in
Yeah.
schools and everything, putting them in a box, like saying, your child isn't like being neurotypical. We don't like it, and like yeah,
Right.
so
Yeah. The whole,
yeah,
yeah, the whole, like,
so
we've got to make your kid more neurotypical because that's what'll make them happy, is like the biggest disservice that I feel like we have done to autistic people. Because, and we've talked about this, right? Like, for me, and when I talked about this 5 years ago, people were like, yeah, but they did the yeah, but, and I understand, but like, my thing has never been about like, let's teach you eye contact, let's teach you how to connect to people in a way that makes sense for them and not you. What that does is that teaches the autistic person to focus on others and not at all at what's going on with them. And so for me, when it comes to like, what are the things that an autistic person, speaking of like this, these are the things that you really need to get good at. It is self-awareness. What do I need? What am I feeling right now? Why is this overstimulating me? Why, you know, and from there, self-advocacy, right? Now, granted,
yeah,
asking and teaching an autistic person to self-advocate, is, I recognize that we are asking them to self-advocate in a society that's telling them to be themselves, but then when they are, we tell them, well, that's weird or that's too much. So we've really given them mixed messages. So I can acknowledge that. Um, and, that doesn't make that self-advocacy piece any less important. This is what I need. And the problem is that by the time I'm meeting someone, usually, for an evaluation or they're in treatment or they're struggling, that person has been made to feel less and less like they have the right to take up space, to where they completely have no awareness of
Right.
what their needs are, you know? So,
Exactly.
yeah, so I would say like, self-awareness, self-advocacy, how do I communicate my needs? The fact that, you want to talk about your favorite topic, or you may not look at me in the eyes, like that's not that important to me. It really comes down to like putting that focus back on like, what's going on with me right now and what do I need?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, I'm telling you, I mean, learning communication, it'll just take you far. Like as an autistic person, that's like true freedom right there. But, like
Yeah.
if you're able to self-advocate even in small ways, that then the world will be like, you know what? Autistic people, they have needs, so we're gonna adjust. And because we're
Yeah.
hearing them, you see that's what's gonna that's the real big change right there. Um,
Yep.
so the other question would be, so there's I know there's some autistic people that out there. I went through the same deal of like, I'm self-improving, I'm doing all the things correctly, but it just seems like it doesn't translate socially, at my job or just at life or family. Like, so what do you say to autistic people that are just struggling and just feeling discouraged right now? Like that just feel like just giving up. Like,
I
so
mean, the first thing that comes to mind, like whenever somebody tells us we're struggling, it's our nature to kind of try and fix it or pull them out of it. Um,
yeah.
and that's where the like life gets better, kind of stuff comes in, which sometimes, when you're in a dark place, you need to hear that. But sometimes when you're in a dark place and you hear that, it just makes you feel like something is even more wrong with you because it's like, well, okay, yeah, like why can't I just feel better? So I think, the first thing that actually comes to mind for me is like your pain and your struggle makes sense to me. Whenever I've talked to an
Uh-huh.
autistic person that they are really struggling, that's one of the things that I say. Like it makes sense to me why you're having a hard time. Um, and that to me is just some good old fashioned, like I'm putting myself as best as I can in someone's shoes and saying, what would it be like for me to feel like not all the pieces are fitting, things aren't making sense, and despite my best efforts, I am misunderstood, and I'm, rejected or not treated fairly or, not given an equal chance, right? Like, and that's kind of been the story, throughout someone's life. Like your struggle makes sense. The fact that you're emotionally struggling, like I get that,
Right.
right? Um, but I think having, an awareness and access to the right resources is important. Um, like I always look at everything as what is this telling me, right? So when somebody is depressed, for example, if they're then going on Discord and gaming, right, and they're chatting with
Hmm.
people on Discord, rather than seeing it as like, oh, Discord has so many problems and you're just gaming excessively and all of this stuff, I'm like, yeah, yeah, we'll get to that stuff maybe. um I want to know, how do you feel after you go talk to people online. You're playing this game that they also play, right? Like after you find connection online with these people, does that kind of help you feel better? And if the answer is yes, then it's like, okay, like, so this, you know, this thing that people are like, that you're avoiding your life, you're gaming all day and you're on Discord, for example. um, I'm not diminishing that or dismissing that, but what I'm saying is like notice what someone does when they are struggling, because that's giving us information into what they need to start to feel better. Um, you know, and I think going towards spaces that are neurodivergent affirming is going to be a big deal. Now, for like I said, fortunately, that's becoming more and more of a thing, right? It used to be that if you were at the airport and you were
Right.
overwhelmed, there's no sensory room, you
Right.
know? Um,
So you push that
and
more.
so, so yeah. So I would say, the struggle makes sense. It's not all in someone's head. It's not a product of like, they're just not managing well enough. Um,
Right.
but I would say like going towards those spaces and those communities where you feel uh, where you feel like you are finding some level of like-mindedness, where you're seen and your lived experience is acknowledged.
Well, that's encouraging words, and you know, like so that's what it really takes. Like if you have a vice, make sure it's bringing you energy, not taking energy from you. Sometimes your special interests will give you energy, but sometimes it won't. Like you know,
Yeah.
for like I'm a dancer. I love to shuffle. Been doing it for like almost 10 years now, and it's like I still
Uh,
love it, but there's uh sometimes I have to step away and kind of work on what gives me energy, what gives me less anxiety about being behind in life, trying to improve my education like I'm doing right now here. And that's what it really takes. So make sure that any advice you have really gives you energy. Anyways,
yeah. Yeah.
those were, I appreciate your time. Um, the those points were so wonderful, and I want to the world. So I didn't introduce you, but what's your name, your title? Like, so I should have done that at the beginning, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's okay. That's
Yeah,
okay. You're not
yeah,
late.
yeah,
I'm Dr. Ingrid Bovida.
yeah.
I'm a testing psychologist and I run a practice out of Salt Lake City, Utah called the Hive Psychological Services. And I travel nationally and into Canada on occasion, and do psychological testing and a whole lot of talking and educating around the autistic population.
Well, I appreciate what you're doing and pushing that education. These are the kind of people that we need, audience, like pushing education, changing the narrative, because that's what we really need. You can't be chanting autism awareness in April and talking about, and then you don't know what autism is.
Yeah.
You see,
Yeah.
I'm just saying. I'm just saying. So it's harsh, but we like if you're saying neurodiversity, actually mean it. So,
Yeah.
anyways, thank
Yeah.
you for your time, Dr. Ingrid, and
Of course.
make sure everyone's subscribed to my channel, like the video, and share whatever thoughts you have. Let's have a conversation and bring some change. And whatever topics that you guys want us that needs to be discussed, or you have something, put in the comments, because the more the merrier. So Thank you all for joining, and I'll see you guys in the next video.